Today's lecture, as previously, I'm going to talk about why the Scots really did win at Stirling Bridge, and it's be 20, 30 minutes, and we'll have some questions. And for those that are joining us, my name is, for the first time, my name is Murray Cook. I am Stirling Council's archaeologist. Okay, so let me pose a question. Let's go back to the beginning of the conflict. So if we get slide 2, Ross, please. Now, these are my three darling daughters posing in the Atlantic Wall on Sheriff Muir. And my question is, after my death, should one of my daughters be Stirling Council's archaeologist? And if so, which one? Right? Now, this seems vaguely ridiculous at the moment. The main issue, the thing that kicks off the Wars of Independence. So if we have slide 3, Ross, please. Now, you will have noticed that I had the kind of Braveheart Wallace statue that used to be at the Lost Monument at the beginning, and I've got Michael Fassbender playing Macbeth, for those that know the film here, and we have St. Margaret. So all of the problems that commence the Wars of Independence, the death of Alexander III, go back to Malcolm III, who is the husband of Margaret. Margaret is his second wife, and because Malcolm III has two wives, and he has like 10 children, all of whom are royal. And what Malcolm does is he makes a very key decision. He wants his to dominate the royal line, and not just his family, but children of his wife. So to this were royal families, and there were cousins and brothers, cousins, and they agreed to swap the kind of high king status of Scotland, so to speak, what becomes the kingdoms, between them. Malcolm, this is on primogeniture, and he focuses the descent on his family, and of course, there are cousins, second cousins, brothers, stepbrothers, etc., that contest this in a series of civil wars. Malcolm III kills Macbeth in combat, or rather, Macbeth is killed as a consequence of warfare. Malcolm, for good measure, also kills Macbeth's stepson, Lulic, who was also a king of Scots, and he also kills Lulic's son, who was also a potential heir to the King of Scots. So all of this is an attempt to focus on Malcolm's second family and all of his children. And if we have the slide, and famously for Scotland, David I, who is one of Malcolm's children and the third, oh no, goodness me, the fourth or fifth to actually become king. His older brothers are Edgar and Alexander. Alexander, of course, founds the chapel in Stirling Castle that's still there if you know where to look. Founds the Gildry, dies in Stirling Castle. David engages in a series of civil wars. He actively encourages the blinding of his uncle, a former King of Scots. Further down the line, 1230, the last of his second cousins, a little girl, the McWilliams, I think from memory, our line is her head is smashed against the market cross or the market cross in Forfar. So the trouble is that the Canmores, Malcolm's children, the Margaret's sons as it's sometimes called, spend the next 100, 150 years extinguishing all threats to their royal line. And that's fine if you've got children, but of course we know that Alexander III, his wife and children from his first marriage both die. He's still a young man. Oh, sorry, Ross, the screen's gone funny. I'm sure you know about that. There we go, back to David. He's still a young man, and he's riding to meet his new young wife, and he falls off the cliff at Kinghorn. So slide 15, Ross. Now, all of these people here are all, strictly speaking, they all have claims to the throne of Scotland, and the nobles cannot decide amongst themselves who is the closest, who isn't. who's descended via a female line, who's descended by a male line, etc., etc. They cannot decide, and there is small-scale skirmish, almost civil war in Scotland, as they try to make the case who has the best case. The two main families are obviously the Bruces and the Commons. The Commons are backed by the Balliols, the Balliols are backed by the Cummins. Sorry, got that wrong. And there's a lot of agitations, a lot of civil war. Eventually, Edward I of England is asked to adjudicate. Now, this is not such a mad idea. Edward was a good friend to Scotland. He was actually Alexander III's brother-in-law, and he was uncle to the kind of royal children, and great uncle to the Maid of Norway, who we'll come back to later on. Now, of course, sorry, I forget, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I got myself. The Maid of Norway is Alexander I's granddaughter who dies en route. Edward I's great niece, and there is widespread disagreement as to who has the best case. Edward uses the adjudication process to claim to be the feudal superior of Scotland, and he draws upon a variety of old evidence, making some things up, and we can go into that later on if people are interested. He claims to be the feudal superior. He appoints arguably weakest candidates. Now, John Balliol, John I of Scotland, has the strongest claim to the throne. Is, as I say, arguably the weakest candidate. So could we get slide 5, please, Ross? So Balliol is crowned, and almost immediately his decisions are being undermined by Edward. Edward basically sets himself up in court and questions and undermines John's decisions. And in effect, what he's trying to do is win over the Scottish nobility to his side. Things reach a head. Edward demands support for his wars in France. We refuse. We side with the French. The start of the Old Alliance. 1295. Then we get the Battle of Dunbar. Edward beats the official Scottish army. Balliol is stripped of his royal regalia. An illegal act, clearly an illegal act. And to a certain position, Scotland ceases to exist as an independent kingdom, with specific reference to Stirling. We know that the castle is actually abandoned. Next slide, please. So at this particular juncture, we have two theories, and it depends where you sit on a political spectrum. We have craven aristocracy who acquiesce with Edward. Doesn't matter if they've got one king, or a Scottish king or an English king, as long as they get to keep their estates. There's an opposing theory that Edward is old. Clearly, Edward II isn't very much good. Edward will die. Why not just wait until Edward I dies, and then we can win back the kingdom? Basically, those are Bruce's tactics, and it just kind of sits where you are. But if we follow the narrative in Braveheart, the narrative which comes of Wallace, you're looking at craven aristocracy who abandon Wallace, who abandon Scotland in order to feast with Edward I and secure his position. And to a certain extent, there is a large degree about that. They're all politicking. The Peace of 1304, Wallace is abandoned, and actually his capture and execution is a condition of the 1304 peace treaty. And yes, Bruce's character is rather lacking here. He is out for himself. Anyway, again, we can come back to that. I could have a whole lecture on Bruce, but that's not why we're here. So, next slide, please, Ross. Though everybody knows this is the old Stirling Bridge. This is not the current Stirling Bridge. The current Stirling, the Wallace Old Stirling Bridge is slightly upstream, but this is just to make the point about the thing. You can see Paris's map, medieval map, on the bottom left of the screen. This only depicts one bridge in Britain, Stirling Bridge. Stirling isn't depicted, the bridge is. The map on the bottom right shows the underlying geography. The dark green 10,000 years ago was underwater. Then it becomes a bog. The upper tidal limit of the Forth, of course, stretches between Cambuskenneth and Kildene. This is where armies cross. This is where armies cross from the Romans all the way through to Bonnie Prince Charlie. If you want to go north, you do it here. If you want to stop someone going north, you do it here. So this is why the Battle of Stirling Bridge takes place here, because it's the army. It's all neck. It's an ideal opportunity for a trap, if you believe Blind Harry, or equally, it's an ideal opportunity to exploit incompetence, right? Two motives that come through in the battle. Next slide, please, Ross. So the broad context for the battle. Bruce and Murray launching separate rebellions. There are quite a few other rebellions around Scotland. These are the main two. They join up. Their army is getting bigger. Edward sends Warren and Cressingham north to defeat them. There's some talk of peace at the beginning. Wallace rejects the peace. The English army start to cross. There is a question mark over his competence. He may change his mind. He rejects advice to use a different crossing, perhaps the crossing at Cambuskenneth, to avoid being surrounded in water. We have the idea about the bridge being narrow, so it restricts movement. The narrative is that when half the English army has crossed, oh, yes, someone's pointed out, I've got Bruce and de Murray there. But I do mean Wallace, but actually Bruce is backing the rebellion. Spotted for the the mistake in my slide. Bruce actually does back this rebellion at one point, but he's kind of being a bit slippery. Anyway, yes, Wallace and de Murray launch rebellions, and they join forces. We have the watching from Abbey Cray. They take English incompetent, English difficulty in crossing. They block the bridge, they block the neck of the meander, and there is a defeat, loss of 5.5. At a European level, the battle is important because it's the first time a professional army of knights is defeated by a peasant nationalist army. And of course, it proves the English can be defeated, right? If we go to the next slide, Ross, please. Now, just a few problems with this, right? Why did Scotland win here when they lost at Dunbar and will lose again at Falkirk? At this point, the Scottish army does not march. So that's the trained professional army, does not march. How does it go from Abbey Cray to the bridge and maintain order? That's over 1 kilometre. Why do the English not maintain order and recross the bridge? Okay, another question is, if we built a causeway, so the bridge ahead is along the causeway. Causeway is a raised road across the low-lying boggy area. If we built a causeway, why is there a narrow road? The causeway is much more expensive to build than a wooden bridge. I'm not entirely certain that the bridge really was that narrow. And also, just to point out, the main Scottish position, the Shiltrin, is actually a defensive position. It's not an offensive position. So what we've got to imagine is that the Scottish army ran for 1 kilometre, actually made themselves into some kind of offensive position, and were able to defeat the English army, who were simply standing with their shields. The English control Stirling Castle at this point, so it's perfectly possible for them just to retreat. Now, there is, of course, the story of the Stuart and the Earl of Lennox on the other side negotiating, and they do join in the battle, but they join in the battle when it's clear that Wallace is winning. How does Wallace begin to win, right? You get the next slide, please, Ross. Now, just a few more of expanded on this. We've got the stuff with Command of Warren, and a little bit more detail, sleeps and changes mind. We also have the story of the Pin Right. So Mr. Wright, a joiner who lived locally in Cambusbarn. He is known afterwards as Pin, and Pin became a family name for children. And the last of the Pin Wrights apparently died in the 19th century. So, according to Blundharris-Wallace, a pin is released at a critical moment in the conflict, trapping the English and causing them to panic. And we have a section from Blundharris-Wallace that describes how the pin was lost, and I will read it. Warren's host thick on the bridge did go. Then he from Jop did take the horn and blow. So loud and shrill he warned good John Wright, who soon struck out the roller with great sleight. Then all went down when the pin was got out, at which rose a fearful cry and shout. Both men and horse into the river fell. Honest John Wright did his part so well. So this narrative implies that Wallace is a tactical genius and that he planned to attack at this crossing. Now, okay, that's fine. There's also some mention that it was set fire to. Again, it's not clear. We know that during the second of, when the castle is recaptured by the English further down the line, that we have repairs of John Rokeby. I think that's actually of the Second Wars of Independence after destroyed it, but it was unclear if the bridge is destroyed. But even if it did collapse, why did they not just retreat to the castle? We also remember the story of Sir Marmaduke de Twenge. He is the keeper of the English keeper of the castle. Famously, the battle is Stirling, and he rides back across the bridge through his own men. Now, he survives Bannockburn and fights. He survives Stirling Bridge and fights at Bannockburn, and actually personally surrenders to Bruce at Bannockburn. So the battle has already turned, and the English are already losing when they're up. So if the bridge does collapse, it collapses after the point at which the English are beginning to lose. So we come back to this first question. What is it that makes the English begin to lose when all they have to do is stand still? And just think about this. So if you think about a football game, you think about an invasion from fans. They stream out into the field. It's like a teardrop, an inverse teardrop. Running. There's someone in the front, and there's a big mass of people in the back. The kind of base of the teardrop is behind, and all the police do is they stand with the shields, they absorb the shock, and then push back. And you've got is an organised thin line will always beat a disorganised attack. So something has to go catastrophically wrong for the English to be defeated. Okay, so next slide, please, Ross. So I'm going to jump to Cambus Kenneth Abbey, which I know many of you know. This is a 17th century illustration of the abbey, and this is shows a point near Hood Farm, which is the farm there. And what it shows is a water gate. So this is a gate from the river, a lockable gate to control access from the river to the grounds of the abbey. Next slide, please, Ross. What many of you will know is that there's actually a harbour there, or a wharf, or some kind of description, some kind of structure to allow ships to unload or be stepped onto. And what you have is a stepping wharf type structure. So a bit like when the steps, and as the tide rises and lowers, it runs up the steps, so you can still get in it being levelled. Now, the thing about the excavations here is that they proved that the tidal range for the river has actually dropped by 2 meters. The wharf only works if the water level, the upper tidal of the Forth, is a metre or 2 meters higher. So now the wharf is contemporary roughly with the Battle of Bannockburn, certainly Stirling was an independence period. So this proves that the tidal range for the Forth was greater at the time of the Wars of Independence than it currently is. So, next slide, please, Ross. and this is the final slide. So what this implies is that the battlefield as we currently understand it, the tidal limit was bigger. The tidal limit was much stronger, much higher. And if you actually increase the height of the river by a metre, the area to fight on Bridge Hall is actually considerably smaller. So I think the following is the case. I think that the English assembled on what was already muddy ground because it's lower than the causeway. I think that the Scots saw an opportunity to attack and that they engaged. Now, there is probably clearly some bad, not an overwhelming good English command, but I think that as the Scots ran down, the already poor English command was probably a bit shocked by the muddy conditions. I also think that it is possible that the tide was lower when they started to assemble and then started to rise as the Scots were approaching. Now, what you then have is you actually have force from two ends. You have people at the back, where the tide is rising, pushing forward to avoid the rising tide. They don't know how deep the river is going to go. They don't know how far it's going to rise. They don't really understand the river. We certainly think most people in the English army died in the river rather than as the conflict. So the Scots are pushing into the English crowd at the front, and then the river is pushing from the back. And then you have, effectively, a panicky crowd rather than an ordered army. And if you have a panicky crowd rather than an ordered army, I think discipline broke down. So I think the discipline is already breaking down in the army because of the tide, because of the poor command from Warren. I think the Scots add to that. And despite the fact that the army is running, there's no order to the army. There's no, this is not the dynamic children that Bruce has at day 2 of Bannockburn. This is a crowd of people pushing into an ordered crowd of people that, and instead of an army of scared individuals, and they are starting to crush each other and then trying to get back over the bridge, which of course restricts the movement of further individuals from the bridge. It is possible that the bridge was that narrow, but I think it was probably a bit bigger simply because there's a causeway. So I think that Scots won at Stirling Bridge because the English misunderstood the nature of the tide and that the Scots gambled and exploited on that. Now, to jump a little bit further ahead, I think that Wallace's reputation because of Falkirk is damaged. I think that Wallace never intended to fight at Falkirk. I just think he was trapped by Edward. I think he was trying to draw Edward further and further north into a more and more expensive campaign to sap his resources and actually to restrict his movement and to make the war unpopular. Those are, again, exactly the standard tactics that Bruce uses throughout the Wars of Independence, first at Bannockburn, and then ultimately through the subsequent invasions. And what we're looking at 1317, 1322, the subsequent English invasions, Bruce actually draws Edward II further and further into his country, and the campaign gets more and more expensive. So that's just a little note to defend Wallace's reputation. But equally, I don't believe the narrative of Blind Harry. I don't think this was a plan. I think this was a very daring, cunning. Anyway, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Hey, Murray, thank you very much. What I'll do is I'll go through and unmute everybody right now, and if I can have a round of applause, please. Wait, no, sorry. I muted everybody. No, I'm muted. Oh. Sorry about that. No, that's. I don't think that's happening this week. Something's going on. Sorry about this, people. Sorry, that seems to be an issue there with me. But if I can, we'll let's move to the Q&A portion of the lecture. So if anybody's got any questions, if you can just raise your hands and then we can unmute you. But if anybody's got a question.
Absolute silence, Ross.
Yes, I think so. Oh wait, yeah, I've got Ian here.
The relative sizes of the two armies. Number.
Can you start that again there?
The English army and the Scottish army. What were the relative sizes in terms of numbers?
I think the standard account has the at least 2-1 in favour of the English. I'm just going to double check because I always get a bit mixed up with Bannockburn. It's either 2-1 or 3-1, but certainly the English outnumber the Scots here. They're better equipped, they're better trained, and they're outnumbered. So they should really have won.
Yes.
And I'm just going to bring up the numbers here. Everything is much more accessible. Yes, we're looking potentially 2-1 in terms of the conflict, but numbers vary. Numbers vary all the time, and of course medieval accounts like to increase the scale of the Scottish victory, for example, or downplay the scale of the Scottish victory, and to a certain extent lots of this stuff about Warren's competence may derive from English analysts trying to explain why England lost.
Fine, thanks very much, Murray. Thank you.
No problem.
A wee question for myself, Murray, was you say a big part of the fact, or the big cause of the victory was the rise in tide level and how different that is from nowadays. Is that a result of just climate change? Is that, I guess, long scale changes in the environment?
Well, there is a deficit. Scotland is rising after the Ice Age. The weight of the glaciers weighed Scotland down. So there's something called isostatic bounce where we're rising up. But certainly the upper tidal limit of the Bannockburn is much lower than it was at the time of the battle. So there are gradual changes, but I'm not entirely certain as to beyond that broad rising up and therefore the water draining out. That explains a lot, but whether I don't think Scotland's moved that much to explain that.
Fascinating. I was really interested with the glacier, how Scotland's rising. Thank you. I've got a question also from Sheena asking in the chat. She asked, when the bridge fell, was this because the pin was removed deliberately, or was this planned beforehand?
Well, that's the principle. It's not entirely certain that the bridge did collapse. It may have been set fire to. It may, but the trouble is we simply don't know. We don't know quite what happened. We have a record of repairs to the bridge later on by an English commander, Sir John Rokeby, certainly Sir Rokeby, but we simply don't know. The story in Blind Harry's Wallace is that Wallace planned a trap to target the English as they crossed, and that John Wright, Pin Wright, removed the pin at the orders of Wallace. The difficulty with that is that, as we know, the battle had already turned when Marmaduke de Twenge runs across. So the bridge is open for Marmaduke de Twenge to recross. And I should say, I didn't make this clear, he was on his horse when he charges across the bridge. He's a fully armoured knight, and he actually ploughs through his own. So the battle had turned before the bridge collapsed, and we're not certain that the bridge did collapse. But it certainly wasn't the narrative that's in Blind Harry's Wallace.
Very interesting. Oh, nice. Well, thank you. I've got another question here from Les Mack. Is it known that Edward I was? Is it known where Edward I was during the battle?
Well, Stirling Bridge is in France.
In France. Excellent.
Is he not? Stirling Bridge. He's not actually. He's not at the battle. It's Warren and Cressingham. He's obviously in Stirling for Falkirk Bridge in the year after, and he stays in the Dominican Friary opposite the train station. We know he's in Stirling again for the 1304 siege, the Warwolf siege. He apparently builds a platform for his queen to watch the siege works. It's possible that platform may have been near Ladies Rock, but it's really not clear.
Interesting. We've also got another question here from Jack, so I'll just meet him, Jack.
That's great. Thanks, Murray. Murray mentioned all these numbers of deaths on Stirling County's rugby ground. So I wonder whether was there any archaeological support for that in terms of metal finds or anything else? Or?
Well, the big difficulty with all of the medieval battlefields is the weapons are iron, and they've rusted away. And also, given the state of the Scottish army, or certainly Wallace's rebel army at this point, it's probably they took the weapons away with them. In terms of specific mitigation, nothing happened ahead of the construction of the rugby pitch. I organised a little bit of metal detecting and test pitting some time ago. We found pottery that could have been contemporary with the battle, but given we're near Stirling, it could just be rubbish from the town. It wasn't entirely clear.
And would the bodies be a mass grave type situation, or would they, apart from the noblemen, would they?
Well, that's the problem. If most people drowned, they would have been washed out to the Forth. Right. The aristocracy would have recovered their own bodies. A lot of people might have died of wounds subsequently, but to date, no mass graves have been found on either Bannockburn or Stirling Bridge. There are definitely graves from the Bannockburn at Cambus Kenneth Abbey. Yes, but at the moment, nothing hard concrete has been found yet.
Great, thanks.
Excellent, thank you for the question, Jack. I've also got another question on the chat here from Joyce Murray. She's asking, do you think that Andrew Murray was the tactician behind the success at Stirling Bridge, and was it a big loss to Wallace when he died after the battle?
This is one of the things I'm quite enjoying, and perhaps it wasn't as particularly clear with the images that we know so little about the battle. We have some accounts. Those accounts are always politically motivated. So, who is Wallace, right? Wallace is a junior son of a minor member of a very low-level aristocratic family. He's not a common man. He's an exceptional individual, though. He rises to be, in effect, de facto king. He's knighted. He becomes guardian of Scotland. He leads the military response. So the Wallace that we have in our head, partly Braveheart, partly Blind Harry's Wallace, who tries to do the right thing. And he's clearly exceptional. He is also embarrassed to Bruce, because feature in the main hagiographical account of the Bruce, the Bruce by John Barber, that was commissioned or written by his sons. So I think it is a view de Murray as the legitimate of the operation and Wallace as the muscle. The statues of Wallace, a big man, a giant man, old, and of course there's that sword in the National Wallace Monument. The sword is made up. There might be some element of it, but it's not. It's kind of constructed in around 50. The Wallace that we have, giant of a man. I mean, he's a young man in his 20s. And also we have the defeated Falkirk. And the defeated Falkirk, I think, is clearly a disaster, because Wallace allows a situation to occur where you have Chilterns that cannot move and are decimated by English archer. Now, I think Wallace has to be more than a big man and a big sword. There was something about him that attracted people to his cause. I think that Falkirk, he made a mistake at Falkirk, but lots of Scottish kings, lots of Scottish rulers made mistakes. So I think he's more than we give him credit for. And I think that he will have loss of the Murray. And I think that the aristocracy were very, very keen to get rid of him. It's not the loss at Falkirk Bridge. If we remember that Robert's dad was supposed to be fighting with the English on the part of at Falkirk Bridge, but declined to appear, so he refused to come with his troops. So I think everybody was slightly mixed about the response to Wallace, but as soon as he was a problem, acquiesced. So he is captured by somebody who's rewarded by Bruce. The Red Comyn and Bruce have all signed up to the peace treaty. They've all accepted Edward's peace. It's Wallace and a few of his close band of followers who are specifically excluded from that 1304 peace treaty, and they are, and indeed his capture and that horrible execution at Smithfield is the price for peace. So yes, very very bloody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for that. I've also had another question here, but you pretty much touched on it. Answered it in the last answer there, was how physical or how frightening was his physical appearance, and about the fear of God and the opposition as they rushed down. But you've quite touched a lot on his appearance there in the last question. Also, the question from McCabe's is asking, when the Murray died, did his family, in brackets sons, inherit any provenance from his Guardian of Scotland title, and what does that actually mean?
Right. Oh goodness me, that's a good question. Right. Yes, the Murray family remain prominent supporters of independence, and if I remember correctly, Andrew de Murray's grandson is a Guardian of Scotland again during the infancy of Robert II. I think he dies as a suspected case of poisoning. I can't quite remember that, but no, the title is the equivalent would be the Roman office of dictator. You're voted in for a period of emergency, and then you're voted out. Now, Guardian isn't regent, but it's in effect the same as regent. Obviously, and I'm not a legal scholar, but I think regent is where the monarch is in infancy and cannot reign, because Guardian is the head of the government in the absence of even an infant monarch, but you have slightly different terms, and I'm pretty sure you cannot inherit the title. You're appointed to the title by your peers, and so this, let's be very clear. The fact that Wallace was appointed Guardian of Scotland makes him an absolutely astonishing, unique individual in Scottish history. Absolutely incredible.
Fascinating. That's really nice that you can't be inherited, it's to be granted. It's very interesting. Have we got any other questions around the room? So if you do, just raise your hand and unmute you. Jim probably there.
Right, Murray.
Hi, Jim.
I noticed you mentioned the guard archaeology excavation at the Cambus Kenneth Abbey, in particular down by the river bank. And clearly, you being the county archaeologist, you get all the papers and all that keeper from these excavations. And obviously, they're helping you to give information during these lectures. Clearly, the excavation at the bank, giving you the different water levels and all that, and providing information about the water levels has helped you reach a conclusion regarding this battle. So, it's not really a question, it's just an observation. It's clearly you're in a really good position to give lectures locally about local history as a result of having access to all the archaeological papers and all the surveys and excavations and all that goes on in the county. Does that help you? Being in that position and
I mean the thing is that the first, I've been in post 9 years, maybe 10 years. So the first 3-4 years I was actually learning. But what I found is that every day I learned something new about Stirling, and then because I learned something new, I get a new report or I read something in preparation for planning development, and I learn a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and it all helps. So at the moment, one of the interesting things I'm learning about is Operation Fortitude North, which is a complete tangent, which was the kind of Allied effort to persuade the Germans that D-Day was actually going to be off the coast of Norway. And in order to do that, there was a fake 4th British Army invented, which was apparently stationed in Scotland, and the headquarters were in Edinburgh Castle, but there was clearly stuff happening around Stirling Castle. And someone on Facebook, just while we're speaking, Steve Peebles, has pointed out that there were fake wooden tanks situated near North 3rd and Earl's Hill, which I never knew. And, given I was actually swimming at North 3rd, here you go, the tale expands. I went swimming at North 3rd the other day, and the water level has dropped by 15-20 feet, and I found a big load of medieval pottery, probably from a farm that was flooded, and the farm is called Water Park, I think, and it was there in the 16th century. It vanishes in the end of the 18th century, and then the 70 years, it's been under 30, 40, 20 feet of water. So I now have, in fact, I'll show this because you'll be able to see them. Here we go. A jug handle, 400-year-old jug handle, recovered yesterday from North 3rd, because you could actually walk where normally there's 20 feet of water. So this was just lying on the surface of the ground. You have to swim out to the middle of North 3rd, and obviously, please be careful. I don't want anybody getting into trouble. So, yeah, Jim, it's just this constant. You read something, you find out something, you recommend something, you find out something, and it just it snowballs. It really does snowball.
Okay, thank you, Murray.
No problem. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, it's fine. No, thank you. I think, is that Douglas? We've got a question from yourself there. Sorry, Douglas, you're not unmuted if you... Oh,
Okay.
there we go, yep.
Murray, do you think that Marmaduke de Thweng gets a bad press? He looks after Stirling Castle, he survives Stirling Bridge and he survives Bannockburn, but do you think he's kind of pilloried for going through his own men rather than fighting his way back to Stirling Castle?
Well, the best way to conclude it is that Bruce thought he behaved honourably and allowed him to retire from the field at Bannockburn. I think it's a colourful story. I think the English scribes at the time are looking to figure out why they lost. So I think everybody involved gets time. I think Wallace gets a hard time because it's considered, you know, he must have cheated. He didn't do the right thing. He was a barbarian. You know, he is absolutely hated by Edward I. I think Warren sleeps in. He orders the troops to cross. He orders the troops to come back. He ignores local advice. You know, that everybody gets a hard time. Thweng, however you pronounce that. He does meet Bruce on the battlefield. He hasn't fled the battlefield. I mean, let's be clear. Bannockburn Day 2, Edward II has fled. Thweng is still there doing something. Although, if I remember, I'm now the dim depths of my memory. I think does Barbara's Bruce have him skulking in a hedge, which is maybe not so good. I think there's some kind of rhyming couplet. I'd have to read that again. But certainly the surrender on the field is described in Barbara's Bruce. But again, Barbara's Bruce is written, 70 years after the events. The timeline is definitely changed. Events are made up to put the Bruce family in a better light. And obviously, as I've said and continue to say, absolutely astonishingly, it doesn't mention Wallace. And I mean, to compare and contrast, Blind Harry's Wallace describes the meeting of Bruce and Wallace after the Battle of Falkirk. Wallace has tears in his eyes and says, you know, you that would be our king fight so strongly against our own. Bruce then rushes to Linlithgow. Now, bear in mind, Bruce didn't fight in Falkirk Bridge at all, but Blind Harry has him fighting on behalf of the English. And you have this great scene where I could probably actually bring it up. I had a copy of it out quite recently. It's a great. Hang on, I'll see if I can get it. It's a great couple of lines. Here we go. So Bruce has rushed back to Linlithgow. Edward I is having a victory feast to celebrate his great victory. And here we go. Bruce, sitting down in his own vacant seat, called for no water, but went straight to meat. Though all his weapons and his other weed were stained with blood, yet he began to feed. The southern lords mock him in terms rude, and said, "Behold, yon Scot eats his own blood," because he's actually consuming the blood of the Scots that he defeated, that he killed at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. And this is so horrific an act that even Edward I is embarrassed. So everybody gets a kind of a bad deal in the Wars of Independence. It's just yes. I think if you survived and you went on and yeah, as I say, Bruce allowing you to retire with honour is probably an indication that you redeemed your reputation.
Cheers.
No problem. Went on a bit long, that one.
Definitely. Well, I like long answers here. Thank you for the
Good.
to Douglas. I've got a couple of questions here, one from McCabe's and one from Les Mack. The first question is, do you think if Edward I was in charge at Bannockburn, there would have been a different result? And the second question is from Les Mack. Why do you say Falkirk Bridge? I was under the impression the battle took place on the hillside or moor above the town.
Right, let's deal with Falkirk Bridge. That was a slip of the tongue. Sorry, I'm talking about Stirling Bridge. So Falkirk Bridge, just apologies. That's just what happens when you listen to your own voice for too long. Right, Edward I. Right, yes, absolutely. I think if Edward I had been alive, I think there's no doubt that the battle would have gone very differently. Edward is in his 60s when he dies. Of course, Bruce is in his 50s when he dies. If Bruce hadn't died, the Second Wars of Independence might not have happened. Here, of course, and bear in mind, Bruce and the days 1 and 2 of Bannockburn work so well because Bruce underground and Edward II walks into a trap. I don't see that happening to Edward. But equally, here is another poser for you. Assume that Edward was going to die anyway, which we everybody knew. Everybody was obvious in 1304 at the height of his powers. During the siege of Warwolf, Robert the Bruce is already plotting the next stage of the rebellion. There's something called the Cambus Kenneth Bond. He has a meeting at Cambus Kenneth with Lamberton to discuss the next stage. For me, the biggest poser is thinking through this. Robert, the Bruces always had the weakest case for the monarchy. The Red Comyn had the strongest case. The Red Comyn had consistently been the leader of the Scottish rebellion in a way that Bruce never was. Prior to 1304, a peace treaty of 1304, and let's think through this, and of course I'm trying to remember all this, 1307, 1306, Bruce is crowned. The 1304, the Comyn, who of course is a kind of second cousin to Balliol, he has the best case. He is the leader of the rebellion. He is the main aristocratic leader in Scotland. He has begun to style himself, sign his letters, King of Scotland, and he is the person that leads the negotiations for the 1304 peace treaty. Bruce has already surrendered by this point. Comyn leads on. Both of them are the clear rivals. Comyn is the favourite. That's why Bruce has to kill him under a flag of truce on holy ground, then rapidly has himself crowned and spends, 2 years of the war? Well, a year of the war skulking in a cave, another 2 years of the war killing anybody that opposes him, the Comyns, the Balliols, the Hership of Buchan, as it's called. That never goes away, those opposition. What do we have? A quarter of the signatories to the Declaration of Arbroath are involved in the Souls plot. We never quite get rid of the disinherited, who launched the Second Wars of Independence. The Earl of Atholl, who is Bruce's cousin, is on the English side during the Battle of Bannockburn, because the Bruces have hacked the Earl of Atholl off. The only way Bruce keeps those together is by killing them or bribing them. And David II complains when he comes to the throne that his nobles have more power and more money and more land than he did, mainly because his dad gave it all away. And David has an awful lot of trouble controlling nobles who have actually grown strong despite Bruce's centralising tendencies. And remember, Bruce isn't the rightful king. He is the de facto king whose successes allow him to become legitimised. The declaration of our oath, the declaration of the clergy, are all about demonstrating that Bruce is the right king because Balliol has failed to be an effective king, and we've decided to get rid of him. Now, of course, the logic of that is we can get rid of Bruce's successor. So David II isn't necessarily the king that we want him to be, which, of course, ultimately leads to his uncle's, his nephew's betrayal of him. So Robert II, the founder of the Stuart dynasty, is David II's older nephew, because his dad married Marjorie, Bruce's daughter. So all of that gets translated. Bruce is at the heart of it because of the Declaration of Arbroath and his illegal of the crown. The question I'd like to pose is, if Bruce had accepted that Comyn was the leader of Scotland, that instead of killing him, he simply agreed to follow orders, we could have shaved, 2-3 years off the war. Edward I still would have died. Edward II was still faced with the same problems. Remember, Edward II is overthrown in a coup led by his wife, and ultimately is killed by members of the aristocracy when Bruce invades, and they panic a bit, and he ends up getting executed rather than let him be seized by the Scots. So the big counterfactual for me is, if Bruce hadn't killed the Comyn, we would have had the Comyn royal family, and we probably wouldn't have had the Stuarts. We probably wouldn't have had David II. We certainly wouldn't have had David II getting captured at the battle of, now I've forgotten which one that is, which battle he gets seized at. I think the whole of Scottish history would have been remarkably different if Bruce had actually bent the knee. And just to give you a further insight into Bruce's mindset and the kind of ins and outs that he goes, he's certainly a fantastic king, a great king. He has two sons, he has twin boys. David, who we know is the younger of two twins. The elder of the twins he names John, in order that John Bruce would become John I, in order to eradicate John Balliol from history, who's actually the John I of Scotland. Anyway, there you go. That was very complicated.
Oh, it's really interesting. It really does pose an interesting question, that whole butterfly effect, what would happen if this never happened, and the ramifications, the causality is immense. Is there any other questions? If I have a last wee scan through the room, if you just raise your hand or pop up a question in the chat if you do. Nope, I think that's us, Murray. I'm having problems with muting everybody. I don't know, some update on Zoom's no, let me do it now. I'll try and hopefully get it fixed next week.
Don't mind.
But if you are there, just a silent wee round of applause would be amazing, which Luke's doing. Thank you very much.